The night Alara Quinn ran into fire, she wasn't thinking about love or betrayal or the future burning in her womb. She was thinking about a little boy's scream. Help! Alara! 3-year-old Finn's voice cut through the smoke like a knife through silk, and her body moved before her mind could catch up. The west wing of the Drake mansion was already swallowed in orange hell, flames licking up the imported wallpaper, eating through wood that cost more than her entire childhood home. Staff members scattered like frightened birds, their designer uniforms smudged with ash as alarms shrieked into the December night. She should have run the other way. Any sane person would have. The fire marshal was already shouting for everyone to evacuate, his voice hoarse with urgency. But sanity doesn't live in the same neighborhood as love, and Alara had crossed that line weeks ago without meaning to. Her bare feet hit the marble stairs, heat pressing against her skin like angry hands. The shawl around her shoulders became her only shield as she wrapped it over her mouth and pushed through smoke so thick it felt like drowning on dry land. The nursery door hung open, wood cracking and groaning under the weight of flames crawling across the ceiling. She found him exactly where she knew he'd be, curled beneath the reading table where they'd spent countless afternoons building blanket forts and pretending the world was kind. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. How about you, baby? I've got you. Her voice came out steady even though her lungs screamed for clean air. She scooped Finn into her arms, his small body trembling, his face buried against her neck. The boy who'd taught her that maybe, just maybe, she could matter to someone. The boy whose father had kissed her one quiet night after too much wine and grief, then pretended it never happened. A ceiling beam groaned above them, splitting, falling. Alara twisted her body, taking the impact on her shoulder as burning wood grazed past. Pain exploded white-hot, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Her legs pumped through the hallway, past family portraits that melted in their frames, past the library where Callan Drake had first interviewed her 9 months ago and looked at her like she was just another transaction. The cold December air hit them like salvation. Finn coughed and sobbed as she stumbled onto the frost-covered lawn, her nightgown singed, her hair smelling like smoke and survival. Other staff members rushed toward them, hands reaching, voices overlapping. Then Callan broke through the crowd. The billionaire who never ran was running now, his perfect composure shattered as he grabbed his son from her arms. For one brief moment, Alara saw something raw in those storm-gray eyes, something that looked almost like the man who'd whispered her name in the dark, who'd traced her face like she was worth remembering. "My God," he breathed, clutching Finn against his chest. "My God, you're safe." Alara swayed on her feet, coughing, barely standing. Her shoulder throbbed where the beam had struck. But she smiled through the pain because Finn was alive, because for once in her forgotten life, she'd been the hero instead of the girl everyone overlooked. That feeling lasted exactly 12 minutes. "Mr. Drake." The fire marshal approached, his face grim, his clipboard already filling with notes that would decide someone's fate. Initial assessment suggests the fire started in the servants' quarters, near the east wing rooms. Near her room, the crowd shifted. Faces turned. Would have been gratitude in their eyes, transformed into something colder, sharper. Suspicion spread like the fire itself, jumping from person to person until even the housekeeper who'd been kind to her stepped back half a foot. "We found a candle holder," the marshal continued, his voice carrying across the frozen lawn. "Possibly left unattended. We'll need to question the staff about proper protocols." Alara's breath caught. "I didn't leave anything burning. I always check, I always." But her voice disappeared into the chaos. The head of security was already pulling Callan aside, whispering urgently. The other servants exchanged glances, and Alara recognized that look. She'd seen it her whole life back in Maine, in the faces of people who decided she didn't belong before she even opened her mouth. She turned to Callan, the man whose son she'd just saved, the man whose child might be growing inside her right now, though she didn't know it yet. Their eyes met across the smoke-stained darkness, and she needed him to say something. Anything. To tell them he knew her, trusted her, believed her. His jaw tightened. He looked at Finn, then back at her, and he said nothing. That silence carved deeper than any flame could reach. In that moment, Alara understood that running into fire had been the easy part. The hard part was standing here, watching everything burn anyway, watching him choosed out over the woman who'd risked her life for his son. Mr. Drake. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. Do you believe me? He turned away. By dawn, she was dismissed. By noon, she was gone. And by the time she discovered she was carrying his daughter, Callan Drake had already decided she was the villain in his perfect life story. But here's what nobody knew yet. Not Callan, not the investigators, not even Alara herself. That fire hadn't started from negligence. And the truth, when it finally surfaced years later, would burn hotter than any flame that December night. Would you run into fire to save someone who might betray you? Two pink lines stared back at Alara from the drugstore pregnancy test, and the fluorescent lights of the clinic bathroom buzzed like angry wasps above her head. Pregnant. The word felt foreign in her mouth, like trying to speak a language she'd never learned. Her hands shook so badly the plastic stick clattered against the sink, and for a moment she just stood there, staring at her reflection in the smudged mirror. The girl looking back wasn't the same one who'd boarded that bus from Maine 2 years ago with stars in her eyes and hope in her suitcase. This girl had smoke in her lungs and betrayal in her bones. She was 24 years old, unemployed, living in a motel room that smelled like mildew and broken promises. She had $300 to her name and a baby growing inside her that belonged to a man who'd looked at her like she was nothing. The clinic nurse knocked softly. Miss Quinn, do you need anything? What she needed was to go back in time. To that night after Finn's birthday party, when Callan had poured her wine in the library, when the grief they'd both been carrying became too heavy to hold alone. She told herself it was just loneliness seeking company. Two broken people finding temporary shelter in each other's arms. He'd kissed her like she mattered, touched her like she was something precious, whispered her name against her skin like a prayer. The next morning, he'd left for a business trip without saying goodbye. Now she was carrying the evidence of that night, and he was probably sleeping in his rebuilt mansion, convinced she'd nearly killed his son. The investigators had cleared her 2 weeks after she was fired, found faulty wiring in the old electrical system, sent a formal apology to an address she no longer lived at. But Callan never called, never came looking, never said the 2 words that might have changed everything. I'm sorry. Alara walked out of that clinic into gray January rain, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. She had a choice to make, and nobody could make it for her. Keep the baby and struggle alone, or let go of this last piece of a man who'd already let go of her. She thought about her own mother, Clara, who'd worked her fingers bloody to raise a daughter after the sea took her husband, who'd smiled through exhaustion and sang lullabies even when there was no food in the cupboard. Her mother hadn't had a choice when tragedy struck, but she'd loved anyway. Maybe love was always a choice. Maybe that's what made it count. By the time Alara reached her motel room, her decision was made. She'd keep this baby, not because she was brave, but because giving up was something she'd learned to refuse a long time ago. She pulled out her last $50 and bought a road map, circling small towns far from the city, far from mansions and memories and men who chose silence over truth. 3 days later, she packed everything she owned into 2 duffel bags and caught a Greyhound bus heading north. The landscape changed outside her window, buildings giving way to trees, concrete melting into lakes and sky. She didn't have a plan, just a desperate need to disappear into somewhere quiet, somewhere nobody knew her name or her shame. The bus dropped her in a town called Riverside, population 3,000, where the air smelled like pine trees and second chances. She rented a tiny cottage near the water with peeling blue paint and a porch that creaked like old bones. The landlady, a woman named Margaret with silver hair and kind eyes, didn't ask questions when Alara paid 3 months up front in cash. You running from something or towards something? Margaret asked, handing over the keys. Alara touched her stomach through her coat. Both. The cottage became her sanctuary. She found work at a lakeside cafe called Martha's, washing dishes and serving coffee to locals who talked slow and smiled easy. The owner, Martha herself, was a grandmother of 6 who took one look at Alera's haunted eyes and hired her on the spot. "You got that look," Martha said, pouring them both coffee. "Like you've been through fire and lived to tell about it." If only she knew how literal that was. The months passed in a blur of morning sickness and evening walks by the water. Alera's body changed, swelling with life, and she found herself talking to the baby growing inside her, telling stories about the grandmother she'd never meet, about boats and fog, and how love sometimes looks like sacrifice. She never mentioned the father. What was there to say? That he was rich and broken and beautiful in the way damaged things often are? That his son had loved her first, trusted her completely, and that trust had been the purest thing she'd ever known until it was ripped away? Summer arrived with fireflies and heat that made her ankles swell. Martha threw her a baby shower in the cafe, and the whole town showed up with hand-knitted blankets and secondhand cribs. These people who barely knew her gave more than a billionaire ever had. On September 3rd, during a thunderstorm that shook the cottage windows, Alera's water broke. Martha drove her to the county hospital with one hand on the wheel and one hand gripping hers, talking the whole way about how women were built for this, how pain was just love's other name. 16 hours later, Alera held her daughter for the first time. The baby had storm-gray eyes that would haunt her forever and a cry that sounded like both a question and an answer. She named her Liana, which meant to bind or to twine, because this child had bound her to hope again. In the hospital room, with dawn breaking pink outside the window, Alera whispered promises into her daughter's tiny ear. "You are loved. You are wanted. Even if he never knows you exist, you'll never doubt that you matter." But as she traced Liana's perfect face, memorizing every detail, one thought burned through her exhausted mind. What would Callan do if he ever found out? Callan Drake stood in his rebuilt mansion and felt nothing. The architects had outdone themselves. Every detail perfect, every corner gleaming, every shadow carefully designed. The West Wing, where the fire had raged, now held a state-of-the-art security center, fireproof walls, sprinkler systems that could activate in 3 seconds flat. He'd spent $2 million making sure nothing like that night could ever happen again. But money couldn't buy back the one thing he'd lost. Not the wing, not his sense of safety. The thing that haunted him was simpler and infinitely more complicated. He'd been wrong. The investigator's report sat in his desk drawer, words he'd memorized like a curse. Faulty wiring in the original electrical system. No evidence of negligence. No candes. No carelessness. Just an old house finally showing its age in the worst possible way. And he'd fired her. Watched her walk away with everything she owned in a single bag while his son cried for 3 days straight. Finn was 5 now, bright and beautiful and missing someone he shouldn't still remember. But children's memories work differently than adults. They remember feelings more than facts, and the feeling of Alera had apparently tattooed itself onto his son's heart. "Daddy, why can't Alera come back?" Finn asked at least once a week, his gray eyes too knowing for such a small face. Callan never had a good answer. How do you tell your son that his father was a coward? That he'd let fear and pride poison something good? That he'd chosen silence when a single word might have saved everything? He hired 3 nannies after Alera left. All qualified, all professional, all wrong. Finn tolerated them with the politeness of a child who'd learned too young that people leave. None of them laughed the way Alera had. None of them sat on the floor to build block towers or made up stories about brave sailors and patient mothers. None of them made the house feel like a home. Callan threw himself into work because work didn't judge and it didn't leave. He acquired 2 companies, launched a tech startup, donated $5 million to children's hospitals with his dead wife's name on the plaque. People called him a visionary. Magazines put his face on covers with words like innovative and philanthropic. Nobody used the word he deserved, guilty. Late at night, when insomnia dragged him from bed, he'd pull up the security footage from before the fire. There she was, reading in the garden with afternoon light in her hair. There she was, teaching Finn to plant flowers. There she was, laughing at something his son said, and that laugh hit him like a punch every single time. He'd kissed her, not just once, but with intention, with something that felt dangerously close to need. It was after Finn's third birthday, after the guests left and the house fell quiet. She'd been cleaning up wrapping paper, humming something soft, and he'd realized she was the first person in years who didn't want anything from him except to be treated like a human being. They'd shared wine, shared stories. She'd told him about her father lost at sea, about a mother who'd loved through poverty, about believing the world could still be kind if you looked hard enough. And he'd told her things he'd never said out loud, about how his wife's death had carved him hollow, about how being a father terrified him because love was just another word for eventual loss. When he'd kissed her, she'd kissed him back. When he'd carried her to his room, she hadn't hesitated. And for a few hours, in the dark, he'd felt human again instead of just functional. The next morning, fear crept back in. What was he doing? She worked for him. She was young, vulnerable, completely dependent on his goodwill. So he'd run, the way he always ran from things that made him feel too much. Business trip to Tokyo. 2 weeks of meetings he could have handled by phone. When he came back, they'd both pretended that night never happened. And the fire changed everything. Standing in his perfect, empty mansion, Callan pulled out his phone and did what he'd done every week for 2 years. He searched for her. Alara Quinn. Social media turned up nothing. Employment records led nowhere. It was like she'd vanished into smoke, which felt like cosmic justice since smoke was what he'd led to find her. His assistant knocked on the office door. "Mr. Drake? The development team needs your approval on the Riverside project." Riverside, the luxury lakeside resort that would net him another $50 million and give wealthy families a place to pretend they understood nature. He'd barely glanced at the location specs, just signed off because land was land and profit was profit. "Tell them I'll visit the site myself next week," he said, making the decision suddenly. Maybe getting out of this mausoleum would help. Maybe watching something new get built would ease the guilt of what he destroyed. His assistant nodded and left. Callan turned back to the window, watching Finn play in the yard with his current nanny, a pleasant woman named Sandra who did everything right and nothing memorable. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that Riverside wasn't just another business venture. It was the town where Alara had rebuilt her life from ashes, where she woke up every morning to a daughter with his eyes, where she'd learned to smile again, carefully, the way you smile when you know happiness is just borrowed and never owned. And in 7 days, his car would roll down Main Street. He'd stop for coffee at Martha's Cafe. And the universe, which has a sixth sense of humor about timing, would make sure Alara was working that shift. But that night, in his empty mansion, Callan knew none of this. He just stood at the window and whispered the same 2 words he'd whispered every night for 2 years. "I'm sorry." The problem with apologies spoken to empty rooms is they never reach the people who need to hear them. The morning Callan Drake's black Mercedes rolled into Riverside, Alara was teaching her daughter how to make pancakes. Liana stood on a kitchen stool, her small hands covered in flour, her tongue sticking out in concentration exactly the way Callan's did when he was thinking through a problem. Not that Alara ever mentioned that similarity out loud. Some truths were better left sleeping. "Mama, is it supposed to be lumpy?" Liana asked, peering into the mixing bowl with those storm gray eyes that made Alara's heart clench every single day. "A little lumpy is perfect. That's how you know it's made with love." It was the kind of quiet Saturday morning that felt like a gift. Sun streaming through the cottage windows, the lake visible through the trees, the radio playing soft country music that talked about second chances and roads that lead you home. Alara had built this life one careful day at a time, and it fit her like worn jeans, comfortable and real. She worked the breakfast shift at Martha's now, had regulars who knew her coffee pour and her smile, but nothing about the mansion or the fire or the man who'd looked at her like she was guilty of crimes she didn't commit. Margaret, her landlady, watched Liana on weekday mornings, and the whole town had adopted them both like stray cats who turned out to be keepers. This was enough. It had to be enough. "Can we feed the ducks after breakfast?" Liana asked, already knowing the answer because Saturday mornings always meant ducks and stale bread and her mother's full attention. "Absolutely." But first, let's flip these pancakes before they burn. What Alara didn't know was that 20 miles away, Callan had woken in a hotel room with a headache and a schedule that included touring the Riverside development site at noon. His assistant had arranged everything, including lunch at a local spot that the construction crew recommends. That local spot was Martha's Cafe. By 10 o'clock, Alara and Liana were at the lake, tossing breadcrumbs to ducks who'd learned to recognize them. Liana giggled every time the ducks fought over pieces, her laughter bright and uncomplicated in the way only children's laughter can be. "Mama, do ducks have daddies?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Alara kept her voice steady. "Of course they do, baby. Where's mine?" 2 years old, and already asking questions Alara didn't have good answers for. She'd prepared for this moment, practiced responses in the mirror, but nothing felt right when she was looking into eyes that belonged to a man who didn't know his daughter existed. "Your daddy lives far away, but you have me and Grammy Margaret and Martha and everyone in town who loves you. Sometimes families look different, and that's okay." Liana seemed to accept this, her attention already back on the ducks. But Alara's hands shook slightly as she tore another piece of bread. Every day, she made the choice not to tell Callan. Every day, she convinced herself it was the right choice. He'd made his position clear when he'd fired her, when he'd believed the worst, when he'd let her walk away carrying his child without a single question. What would he do if he knew? Throw money at the problem? Demand custody? Or worse, reject Liana the same way he'd rejected her mother? No, some doors were better left closed. By 11:30, they were back at the cottage, Liana down for a nap while Alara prepared for her evening shift at the cafe. She braided her hair, put on the simple dress and apron that served as her uniform, kissed her sleeping daughter's forehead. Margaret arrived right on time, settling into the rocking chair with her knitting. "You look tired, honey," Margaret observed, her needles already clicking. "Everything okay? Just didn't sleep well. Had strange dreams." She didn't mention that the dreams were always the same. Fire and smoke and gray eyes watching her walk away. Some nights she woke up gasping, convinced she smelled burning wood. Other nights, she woke up crying, remembering the way Callan had touched her face and said her name like it meant something. The human heart is a stubborn thing. It holds on to love long after love has let go. Martha's Cafe sat on Main Street, all red checkered curtains and pie displays and the smell of coffee that could wake the dead. Alara arrived at noon to help with the lunch rush, tying her apron and falling into the rhythm of orders and small talk, and keeping her hands busy so her mind couldn't wander. The bell above the door chimed constantly. Locals came and went. Tourists stopped for directions. Everything normal, everything safe, everything exactly as it should be. Then at 12:43, the bell chimed again. Alara was refilling coffee for Mr. Henderson at table 6, her back to the door, laughing at his story about his granddaughter's school play. She didn't see the man who walked in, didn't notice Martha's sharp intake of breath or the way conversation seemed to pause like the world was holding its breath. She turned around with the coffee pot still in her hand. And there he was. Callan Drake stood in the doorway of Martha's Cafe, looking exactly the same and entirely different. Same storm gray eyes, same strong jaw, same expensive clothes that marked him as someone who didn't belong in a town where people measured wealth in good neighbors and enough to eat. But there was something new in his face, something carved and worn that made him look older than his 38 years. Their eyes met across the cafe, and time folded in on itself. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, nobody moved. Alara's hands went numb around the coffee pot. Callan's face drained of color like he'd seen a ghost, and maybe he had. After all, he'd spent 2 years searching for a woman who'd vanished into smoke. Alara. Her name came out like a prayer and a curse and a question all tangled together. Every person in that cafe was watching now, sensing drama the way small towns always do. Martha moved closer, protective instinct flaring. Mr. Henderson's eyes narrowed suspiciously at this stranger in a suit. Alara found her voice, though it came out steadier than she felt. "Mr. Drake." The formality hit him like a slap. She watched something flicker across his face, pain or regret, or maybe just shock. He opened his mouth to say something else, but Alara was already moving, walking past him to the kitchen with the coffee pot still in her white-knuckled grip. She made it exactly 3 steps into the back room before her legs gave out, and Martha caught her, wrapping strong arms around her shoulders. "That's him, isn't it?" Martha whispered. "The father." Alara couldn't speak, could only nod as the world she'd so carefully built began to crack like ice under pressure. Outside, Callan stood frozen in the cafe doorway, his heart hammering, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. But only one thought burned through everything else. She was here. After 2 years of searching, of guilt, of whispered apologies to empty rooms, she was here. And she'd looked at him like he was a stranger. What Callan didn't know yet, what would shatter his world when he learned it, was that just 3 blocks away, his daughter was napping in a cottage with peeling blue paint, dreaming whatever dreams 2-year-olds dream, completely unaware that her father had just walked back in her mother's life. Callan didn't leave the cafe. He should have. Any reasonable person would have recognized the look on Alara's face, the way she'd fled to the kitchen like he was the fire all over again, and had the decency to walk away. But Callan Drake had spent 2 years being reasonable, being careful, being the man who did the right thing too late to matter. And it had gotten him nowhere except alone. So he sat down at the counter and waited. The cafe hummed with tension. An older woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes approached him, wiping her hands on an apron that read Martha's in faded script. She didn't smile. Coffee. Her tone made it clear coffee was the only thing he'd be getting. "Please." "Black." He paused, choosing words carefully. "Is she okay?" Martha's eyes could have cut glass. "You got some nerve asking that question." "I know." And he did. God, he did. "I just need to talk to her. 5 minutes." Men like you always need something. Martha poured his coffee with hands that had seen decades of work. What you need and what you deserve are 2 different things. Before Callan could respond, Alara emerged from the kitchen. She'd composed herself, pulled on that mask of calm he recognized from the months she'd worked for him. The mask that said nothing could touch her, nothing could hurt her, even though her eyes told a different story. She walked to the counter, kept the length of it between them like a barrier. "Smart, what are you doing here?" Her voice was steady, but her hands gripped the counter edge. "A development project by the lake. My company is building a resort." He watched her face for reaction, found none. "I had no idea you were here, Alara. I've been looking for you." "What?" The question landed flat, without curiosity. "Because I owe you an apology. Because I was wrong. Because—" He stopped, aware of the entire cafe, listening to every word. "Can we talk somewhere private?" "No." The word was simple, final. It shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. "The investigators cleared you," he continued, voice low. 2 weeks after I fired you. They found a faulty wiring. It was never your fault. I should have believed you, should have listened, should have done a lot of things." Alara's composure cracked slightly. "You're 2 years too late with your apologies, Mr. Drake. Don't call me that. That's who you are. My former employer who fired me without a second thought. Why would I call you anything else?" The truth of it stung worse than any accusation. They'd been intimate, had shared grief and wine and one night of being human together. And he'd thrown it away the moment fear whispered in his ear. "Finn asks about you." It was a low blow, using his son, but Callan was desperate. "Every week, he asks when you're coming back." Something flickered across Alara's face. "Pain, maybe, or longing." "How is he?" "Missing you. He draws pictures of you sometimes. Stick figures with long dark hair reading books." Callan leaned forward. "He loved you, Alara. And I—" "Stop." She held up a hand, and he saw it tremble. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to show up after 2 years and act like love matters when it didn't matter enough before. It did matter. I was scared and stupid, Anne. And now you're here on business. Found me by accident, and thought you'd clear your conscience with coffee and apologies." Alara's voice was rising, emotion breaking through. "Well, congratulations. You found me. You said you're sorry. Now you can leave with a clean slate, and I can go back to the life I built without you." Martha touched Alara's shoulder gently. Want me to ask him to go? Alara took a breath, steadied herself. No, he'll leave on his own. Men like him always do. That hit harder than anything else. Men like him, as if he was just another rich guy who treated people as disposable. And maybe he was. Maybe that's exactly what he'd become without realizing it. Callan stood, pulling out his wallet. Martha waved it away with disgust. He left $100 bill on the counter anyway, knowing it was insult more than payment. I'm staying at the Riverside Inn, he said quietly. Room 217. If you change your mind about talking, I'll be there until Wednesday. Alara said nothing, didn't even look at him. He walked to the door, hand on the handle, then turned back. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I destroyed something that could have been. He stopped, searching for words that didn't exist. I am sorry. For all of it. And I'll spend the rest of my life wishing I'd been brave enough to believe in you. Then he left, the bell above the door chiming his exit like a period at the end of a sentence. The cafe exploded into whispered conversations the moment he was gone. Alara stood frozen at the counter, Martha's arm around her shoulders, trying to remember how to breathe. You okay, honey? I need to check on Liana. Your shift doesn't end for 3 hours. I don't care. Alara untied her apron with shaking hands. I need to see my daughter. She practically ran out the back door, down the 3 blocks to her cottage, burst through the door, so fast Margaret jumped in her rocking chair. Liana was still napping, curled up with her stuffed duck, completely peaceful. Alara sank to the floor beside the small bed, watching her daughter sleep, and finally let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. The shock, the anger, the dangerous, treacherous flutter of her heart when she'd seen him standing there. Mama, Liana's sleepy voice made her look up. Why are you crying? Happy tears, baby. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy. It was a lie. But mothers tell lies to protect their children. And this was the biggest protection of all, keeping Liana's world safe from a father who might destroy it the same way he destroyed her mother's. What Alara didn't know was that Callan wasn't staying at the Riverside Inn. He'd checked out the moment he got back to his room, canceled his meetings, told his assistant to clear his schedule for the week. Because seeing Alara wasn't an accident he could walk away from. And when he'd looked around that cafe, when he'd noticed the children's drawings on the wall and one particular crayon masterpiece signed Liana, when he'd seen the gray-eyed little girl in the photo behind the counter standing next to Alara with the same smile he saw in his mirror every morning, when he put those pieces together in his mind during the walk back to his hotel, everything changed. He made 3 phone calls, the first to his lawyer, the second to a private investigator, the third to his son's nanny, telling her he'd be gone longer than planned. Because Callan Drake was many things, but he wasn't a fool. And that child in the photo was roughly 2 years old, with his eyes, with his son's dimple, born exactly 9 months after the night he and Alara had stopped pretending they were just employer and employee. He had a daughter, and Alara had kept her hidden. Callan stood outside Alara's cottage at 7 in the morning, watching smoke curl from the chimney into the cold air, and tried to decide if what he was about to do made him a fighter or a monster. He'd spent all night staring at the photo his investigator had sent within 3 hours of being hired. Liana Marie Quinn, born September 3rd, 2 years ago. No father listed on the birth certificate. Medical records showing a healthy delivery at County General. And dozens of photos pulled from the cafe's social media. This small girl with storm gray eyes and his mother's smile, the grandmother she'd never meet. His daughter, walking around in a town 3 hours from his mansion, growing up without his name, his protection, his love. And Alara had chosen that, had looked at him and decided he wasn't worthy of knowing. The rage had hit him around midnight, hot and justified. She'd kept his child from him, made him miss 2 years of first words and first steps and every precious moment parents are supposed to treasure. What gave her that right? But by 3 in the morning, when rage burned itself out and truth crept in, he'd remembered something important. He'd given her that right. The moment he'd fired her without listening. The moment his silence had answered her question louder than words ever could. Now he knocked on her door, 3 sharp raps that echoed in the quiet morning. Alara opened it wearing pajama pants and an old sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, and the shock on her face would have been satisfying if he wasn't so terrified of what came next. How did you find my house? Her voice was ice. I'm a billionaire with resources. It wasn't hard. He hated how that sounded, like a threat. Can I come in? Absolutely not. Alara, please. We need to talk about. He stopped as a small voice called from inside the cottage. Mama? Who's at the door? Every muscle in Callan's body locked. That voice. High and curious, and completely unaware that her entire world was about to change. Alara's face went pale, her hand tightening on the doorframe. Just a friend, baby. Stay in the kitchen. I want to see. Before Alara could stop her, Liana appeared at the door, clutching a stuffed duck, wearing pajamas covered in stars. She looked up at Callan with eyes that were mirrors of his own, and the world tilted sideways. Hi, she said simply. Are you a giant? The question startled a laugh out of him, inappropriate and helpless. No, sweetheart. I'm just tall. I'm Liana. I'm 2 3/4. She held up fingers that couldn't quite manage the math. Who are you? Callan looked at Alara, saw panic and resignation warring in her eyes, and made a choice. I'm Callan. I'm a friend of your mama's. From the fire days? Liana asked, and Alara's sharp intake of breath told him everything. She'd told their daughter about the fire, about the mansion, about him, maybe in whatever child-safe version of the truth she could manage. Yeah, he said softly. From the fire days. Liana seemed satisfied with this. Mama says you can't walk through fire alone. You need someone brave with you. His throat closed. He looked at Alara, saw tears she was fighting to hold back. Your mama's right. She's very brave. The bravest, Liana agreed. Then, with the attention span of toddler, I'm hungry. Can we have pancakes? Alara found her voice. Go wait in the kitchen, baby. I'll be right there. Liana disappeared, humming to herself. The moment she was gone, Alara stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her, putting her body between Callan and the daughter he'd just met for the first time. You need to leave. Her voice shook with emotion barely contained. She's mine. Not a question. A statement of fact that changed everything. She's mine. I carried her. I raised her. You don't get to show up and claim her because biology says so. I have rights. You have nothing. Alara's voice cracked. You looked at me like I was garbage. You fired me when I was pregnant with your child. You never came looking, never asked questions, never cared enough to wonder why I disappeared. Because I didn't know. The words came out louder than he intended. He lowered his voice, aware of small ears potentially listening. I didn't know, Alara. If you had, what? Would you have believed me then either? Or would you have accused me of trying to trap you, of getting pregnant on purpose to get my hands on your money? The accusation hung between them like smoke. And the terrible part was, 2 years ago, he might have thought exactly that. The man he'd been, carved from stone and suspicion, might have seen manipulation instead of truth. I've changed, he said quietly. People don't change. They just get better at hiding who they really are. That's not fair. Fair. Alara laughed, bitter and broken. You want to talk about fair? I was homeless and pregnant at 24 because you were too much of a coward to believe in me. I gave birth alone because the father of my child decided I wasn't worth the benefit of doubt. So don't you dare stand on my porch and talk to me about fair. Callan absorbed each word like a physical blow. Tell me what I can do. Tell me how to fix this. You can't. Something stayed broken. I want to know her. His voice cracked. Please. I've already missed 2 years. Don't make me miss the rest of her life. Alara's eyes filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. And what happens when you get bored? When being a father becomes inconvenient? When your next business deal is more important than her dance recital, or her scraped knee, or her nightmares about monsters under the bed? That won't happen. You don't know that. I can't risk her heart on your good intentions. Inside the cottage, Liana started singing a song about ducks and rain, her voice pure and untroubled. Both adults turned toward the sound, drawn by the magnetic pull of a child who had no idea she was the center of the storm. She asked about her father sometimes. Alara said softly, I tell her he lives far away, that sometimes families look different. She seems okay with it now, but one day she won't be. One day she'll want answers I can't give without destroying the image she has of you. What image? That you didn't know. That if you had, you would have loved her. Alara finally let the tears fall. I'd rather she believed that lie than learn you knew and didn't care enough to stay. The implication gutted him. You think I'd walk away from her? I think you walked away from me. There it was. The truth they've been dancing around. This wasn't just about Liana. It was about what happened between them before the fire, after the fire, and in all the silent moments when he could have fought for her and chose safety instead. Callan took a step closer. I'm not walking away this time. From either of you. You don't get both of us. That's not how this works. Then tell me how it works. Set the rules. I'll follow them. Alara studied his face, looking for lies, for angles, for whatever trap she was convinced existed. You can meet her. Supervised visits. Here where she feels safe. But you don't tell her who you are. Not yet. Not until I'm sure you're going to stick around. It wasn't enough. It was barely anything. But it was a door cracked open, and Callan had learned that sometimes you have to be grateful for cracks. Okay, he said. When can I start? Tomorrow. 5 o'clock. 1 hour. She opened the cottage door. And Callan? If you hurt her, if you make her feel like she doesn't matter even for a second, I will make sure you never see her again. I don't care how many lawyers you have. He believed her. I won't hurt her. I swear. Alara disappeared inside, closing the door between them. Callan stood on that porch for a long moment, listening to mother and daughter laugh about something in the kitchen, and felt the weight of what he'd almost lost forever. Tomorrow, he'd meet his daughter properly. Tomorrow, he'd start earning back what he'd thrown away. But first, he had to figure out how to be the man they both deserved. The next evening, Callan arrived at 5 o'clock exactly, carrying a stuffed giraffe that suddenly seemed ridiculous in his hands. Will you bring a daughter you've never met? Toys felt like bribes. Books felt presumptuous. The woman at the toy store had suggested the giraffe because every child loved giraffes, but standing on Alara's porch, he felt like an idiot. Alara opened the door before he could knock. She'd changed from her cafe uniform into jeans and a soft blue sweater, her hair pulled back, her face carefully neutral. Behind her, the cottage smelled like cookies and cinnamon. Ground rules, she said without greeting. No promises you can't keep. No gifts that make her think you're trying to buy her affection. No questions about me or our past. And if she gets uncomfortable, you leave immediately. Understood. She let him in. The cottage was small but warm, filled with the kind of lived-in comfort his mansion had never achieved. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator. Books spilled from shelves. A pillow fort dominated the living room. Liana peeked out from behind the fort, still clutching her duck. You came back. I did. I brought you something, if that's okay with your mama. He glanced at Alara, who gave a tight nod. Liana approached cautiously, took the giraffe, studied it with serious gray eyes. What's its name? I don't know. What do you think it should be? She considered this with the gravity of someone naming a star. Gerald, because giraffes need fancy names. Callan smiled. Gerald's perfect. For the next hour, he entered a world he'd forgotten existed. They built towers with blocks and knocked them down with dinosaurs. Liana explained, very seriously, that velociraptors were actually small and had feathers, information she'd learned from a library book. She made him tea in plastic cups and served invisible cookies with elaborate descriptions of each flavor. Alara watched from the kitchen, pretending to wash dishes, but really monitoring every interaction. She saw how carefully Callan moved, aware of his size and a space made for small people. How he listened when Liana talked, asking questions that showed he actually cared about the answers. How his face transformed when she laughed, something almost like wonder breaking through. This wasn't the cold businessman who'd fired her. This was someone trying desperately to be better. Do you have kids? Liana asked suddenly, and the room froze. Callan's eyes found Alara's across the space. She shook her head slightly. Not yet. Not like this. I have a son, he said carefully. He's 5. His name is Finn. Does he like dinosaurs? He loves them. Maybe you could meet him sometime. Okay. Simple as that. In Liana's world, meeting new friends was easy. She had no idea she was agreeing to meet her half-brother. When 6 o'clock arrived, Callan stood to leave, and something unexpected happened. Liana hugged his leg, quick and impulsive, then ran back to her pillow for it like she'd done something brave. The gesture hit him harder than any business deal, any success, any achievement in his entire life. This small person, who owed him nothing, had offered affection freely, and he hadn't earned it yet. Alara walked him to the door. "Tomorrow?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded. Same time. Over the next 2 weeks, Callan came every evening. He learned that Liana loved stories about the ocean because her grandmother had lived by the sea, that she was afraid of thunderstorms but pretended she wasn't, that she could sing entire songs from memory and made up elaborate games with rules only she understood. He also learned that being a parent wasn't about grand gestures. It was about showing up, about remembering that she liked strawberries but not blueberries, about sitting through the same story 5 times because she needed the comfort of repetition. Slowly, impossibly, Alara's walls began to crack too. One evening, after Liana fell asleep mid-story, curled against Callan's side on the couch, Alara sat down across from them. The sight of her daughter peaceful in this man's arms should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like something long broken, starting to heal. "She loves you," Alara said softly. "She doesn't know why yet, but she does. I love her." The words came easy because they were true. "I know I don't have a right, but I do. Love isn't about rights. It's about showing up when it's hard. Then let me keep showing up. Not just for her. For you too." Alara's breath caught. "Callan, we can't." "Can't what?" "Can't try. Can't forgive. Can't admit that what we had before the fire was real." He kept his voice low, aware of sleeping ears. "I think about that night, Alara. All the time. The way you looked at me like I was human instead of just successful. The way we talked until dawn about everything and nothing. The way it felt like coming home to someone I'd been searching for without knowing it. Then you left. Then I got scared. Because people I love leave or die or disappear, and it felt safer to run first." He looked down at Liana, brushed a curl from her face with gentle fingers. "But I'm done running. I'm done choosing safety over truth. I want to be part of this. Part of her life. Part of yours, if you'll let me. You hurt me." The words were simple, but carried 2 years of pain. "I know, and I'll spend every day earning back your trust, if that's what it takes." Alara studied him. This man who destroyed her and was now carefully rebuilding what he'd broken. She deserves stability. Not a father who's here today and gone tomorrow because his business needs him. "So, I'll move my business here. Open an office in Riverside. I can work from anywhere." "You do that." "I do anything." He meant it. "Name it. Whatever you need to believe I'm serious." She was quiet for a long moment, watching her daughter sleep. "Tell her the truth. That you're her father. But not yet. Not until she's ready." "When will she be ready?" "I don't know. But I'll know when I see it." Alara stood, moved to lift Liana. "You should go. She'll wake up confused if you're still here." Callan handed their daughter over carefully, and his hands brushed Alara's. And that simple touch carried electricity they both felt but neither acknowledged. At the door, he turned back. "For what it's worth, I think about more than just that night. I think about every moment I got to watch you with Finn. Every smile, every laugh, every time you made that house feel less like a museum and more like a home. I think about the woman who ran into fire without hesitation. And I realize I've been in love with you since long before I was brave enough to admit it." He left before she could respond, but he heard her sharp intake of breath, and that was enough. Inside the cottage, Alara stood holding her sleeping daughter, tears streaming down her face, and whispered to the empty room, "I think about those things too." Outside, Callan sat in his car for 10 minutes before starting the engine, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt something dangerous and beautiful. Hope. What neither of them saw was the black sedan parked 2 houses down, where a photographer with a long lens had just captured every moment through the cottage window. By morning, the photos would be on a lawyer's desk with a simple message: "Found the child. What do you want us to do?" And the lawyer, who worked for someone with very specific ideas about protecting family legacies, would make a phone call that would change everything. The envelope arrived on Alara's doorstep 3 days later. hand-delivered by a woman in a gray suit who looked like she ate souls for breakfast. Elara Quinn. The woman's voice was professional ice. Yes, you've been served. She handed over the envelope and walked away before Elara could ask questions. Inside were 20 pages of legal documents that might as well have been written in a foreign language. Words like paternity, custody arrangement, and child support jumped out between dense paragraphs of legalese. But the signature at the bottom was crystal clear, Callan Drake. Her hand shook so badly the papers scattered across the porch. He'd promised. He'd looked her in the eye and promised he wouldn't hurt them. And now this. Legal papers demanding paternity tests, formal custody arrangements, visitation schedules that reduce their daughter to a transaction. Margaret appeared at her garden gate, concern on her face. Honey, what's wrong? He's suing me. The words came out hollow. For custody. After everything, after I let him in, he's trying to take her away. By noon, Elara was sitting across from a lawyer in a cramped office that smelled like old coffee and broken dreams. The lawyer, a tired woman named Sandra Chun, reviewed the documents with increasingly worried eyes. This is aggressive, Sandra said finally. He's not just asking for visitation. He's requesting joint custody immediately, with the option to petition for primary custody if certain conditions aren't met. What conditions? Financial stability, permanent housing, ability to provide educational opportunities. Sandra looked at her sympathetically. He's arguing he can provide a better life for the child. Money doesn't make you a parent. No, but judges care about stability. And he has resources we can't match. Sandra leaned forward. Here's what I need to know. Can you prove he abandoned you? That he knew about the pregnancy and chose not to be involved? He didn't know. I never told him. Sandra's face fell. That's going to hurt our case. Courts favor fathers who want involvement, especially if they were denied the opportunity to know their child existed. So what do I do? Negotiate. Accept some custody arrangement now, before it goes to trial and he potentially gets more. Elara felt her world crumbling. I can't share her. Not with him. Not like this. Then you might lose her completely. The words hung in the air like smoke. Elara walked out of that office feeling like she'd run in a fire all over again, except this time nobody was coming to save her. She went straight to Martha's cafe, found her boss in the back office doing inventory. The moment Martha saw her face, she wrapped her in a hug that smelled like flour and home. He's suing me for custody. Elara sobbed into Martha's shoulder. I let him meet her. I trusted him, and he's trying to take her away. That son of a... Martha caught herself, rubbed Elara's back. Did you talk to him? Maybe there's a misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? His name is on legal documents demanding custody of my daughter. Then we fight. This whole town will stand with you. But even Martha's fierce loyalty couldn't change the reality. Small-town support didn't stand up against billionaire lawyers in court. Elara picked up Liana from Margaret's house that afternoon, held her daughter extra tight, memorizing the feel of her small body, the smell of her hair, the sound of her giggle. Every moment suddenly felt borrowed, like sand slipping through fingers. At 5 o'clock, when Callan arrived for his usual visit, Elara met him at the door with Liana deliberately kept inside. You need to leave. Her voice was stone. Confusion crossed his face. What happened? Is Liana okay? Don't you dare pretend you care. Don't you dare stand there and act like you didn't just try to steal her from me. Steal her? What are you talking about? She threw the legal documents at his chest. This, your lawsuit, your attempt to take custody because apparently letting you into our lives wasn't enough. Callan caught the papers, scanned them, and his face went white. I didn't file this. Your name is right there. I didn't file this, he repeated, voice rising. Elara, you have to believe me. I would never believe you. She laughed, bitter and broken. I did believe you. I let you into my home, let you meet our daughter, let you back into my life. And this is how you repay that trust. I'm telling you the truth. I didn't file these papers. Someone else did. He was flipping through pages frantically. This is my family's lawyer. My mother's lawyer, specifically. She must have. I don't care who filed it. Your name is on it, which means you're responsible. Let me fix this. Give me 24 hours to sort this out. Get off my property. Alera's voice cracked. And don't come back. I'll see you in court if I have to, but you're not getting near my daughter until then. Our daughter, Mine. The word was final. She was mine when I carried her alone. Mine when I gave birth alone. Mine when I raised her alone. You don't get to claim her now just because biology says so. Liana's voice called from inside. Mama? Is Callan here? The hope in that small voice shattered something in both adults. Callan's eyes filled with tears he didn't bother hiding. Please don't shut me out. Not again. I swear I didn't know about this lawsuit. Your promises don't mean anything anymore. She closed the door in his face and locked it, then slid down to the floor as Liana came running, concerned and confused. Where's Callan? I made him a picture. Alera gathered her daughter close. He had to go away for a while, baby. When's he coming back? I don't know. The truth, painful and uncertain. Outside, Callan stood on that porch with legal documents he hadn't authorized, watching his second chance evaporate like morning fog. He pulled out his phone and called his mother's lawyer with hands that shook from rage. What the hell did you do? He demanded the moment the call connected. Protected your interests, Mr. Drake. Your mother was concerned when she learned about the child. She felt it was important to establish legal rights before the situation became complicated. The situation is complicated because you filed a lawsuit without my authorization. We have power of attorney for family legal matters. Your mother authorized the action. Withdraw it. Now, every single filing. Mr. Drake, I strongly advise. I don't care about your advice. Withdraw the lawsuit immediately or you're fired, and I'll make sure every firm in the country knows why. He hung up, called his mother, and had the worst conversation of his adult life. She'd done it out of love, she claimed. Out of concern that this small-town girl was manipulating her son. Out of protection for the family legacy. You destroyed everything, he told her, voice hollow. You took away the only chance I had to be part of their lives. She kept your daughter from you, his mother countered. Don't you see? She's not trustworthy. She kept Liana from me because I gave her every reason not to trust me. And you just proved her right. He hung up before his mother could respond and called his lawyer with instructions to file withdrawal paperwork immediately. But he knew it was too late. The damage was done. Trust, once broken twice, doesn't heal easy. That night, both Callan and Alera lay awake in separate beds, 3 miles apart, thinking the same thought. How do you save something that keeps burning? And Liana, who understood more than the adults realized, whispered to Gerald the giraffe, I think Mama's crying again. I wish Callan would come back and make her smile. Children always know when love is breaking. They just don't understand why adults make it so complicated. The lawsuit was withdrawn within 24 hours, but the scar remained. Callan tried calling. Alera didn't answer. He tried showing up at the cottage. Alera didn't open the door. He tried leaving notes explaining everything, flowers with apologies, toys for Liana that sat uncollected on the porch until Margaret took them inside with a sad shake of her head. A week passed. Then 2. Liana stopped asking when Callan was coming back, which hurt worse than if she'd asked every day. She just quietly put Gerald the giraffe on a shelf and didn't play with him anymore. Martha's Cafe became a fortress of support. Every regular customer knew what happened, and they closed ranks around Alera like she was family, which in small towns she was. When Callan tried to enter for coffee one morning, 3 men politely but firmly suggested he take his business elsewhere. He stood outside looking through the window at Alera serving customers, laughing at something Mr. Henderson said, and the distance between them felt bigger than miles. It felt permanent. But Callan hadn't built an empire by giving up when things got hard. He rented a small house on the other side of Riverside. Not a mansion, just a simple 3-bedroom with a yard. He enrolled Finn in a local elementary school and moved his entire operations to a home office. If Alera wanted proof he was serious about staying, he'd give it to her. Finn, who didn't understand the adult complications, just knew his dad seemed sadder but was around more. And one afternoon, walking home from school, he saw a little girl feeding ducks by the lake. Hi, Finn said, because 5-year-olds don't overthink introductions. I'm Finn. Liana looked up, curious. I'm Liana. That's a funny name. So, is yours, he countered, smiling. They became instant friends the way children do, building stick bridges over puddles and making up stories about the ducks being secret agents. Margaret, who was watching Liana, recognized Finn from the photos Alara had shown her. She should have separated them, should have called Alara immediately. But watching them laugh together, so natural and easy, she made a different choice. Sometimes adults need to get out of the way and let hearts figure things out. When Alara arrived to pick up Liana an hour later, she found her daughter playing with a boy who had familiar gray eyes and her father's smile. "Mama." Liana ran over. "This is Finn. He's my new friend. Can he come over sometime?" Alara's breath caught. She looked at Margaret, who shrugged apologetically. They found each other. I didn't have the heart to separate them. Finn walked over shyly. "Are you Alara? My dad talks about you." The simple statement, delivered with childhood innocence, hit harder than any legal document. "He does. All the time. He says you're brave and kind, and he made mistakes, but he's trying to be better." Finn tilted his head. "Are you his friend again? How do you explain adult complications to a 5-year-old? How do you tell him that love and trust are different things? That wanting to forgive isn't the same as being able to? It's complicated, sweetheart. That's what grown-ups always say when they're scared." Finn said it matter-of-factly. "My dad says being scared is okay, but staying scared forever means missing good stuff." Out of the mouths of babes. Alara knelt down to his level. "Your dad sounds smart. He's sad a lot. I think he misses you guys." Finn looked at Liana. "Can she come to our house? We have a really good yard for playing." Before Alara could answer, Margaret spoke up. "Why don't we all have dinner at my place? Neutral territory. Let the kids play while the adults talk." It was a trap, beautifully laid, and Alara walked right into it, because Liana was looking at her with such hope, and Finn seemed so earnest, and maybe, just maybe, Margaret was right that they all needed to talk. 2 hours later, Callan arrived at Margaret's house expecting a quiet dinner with Finn and was stunned to find Alara sitting on the porch, watching their children play in the yard together. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Permission, maybe, but just exhaustion from fighting. "Margaret ambushed me," Alara said quietly. "Me too." He sat down carefully, leaving space between them. The kids found each other. Apparently, Liana hasn't stopped talking about her new friend. She paused. "I read the withdrawal papers, and the letter from your lawyer explaining what happened. I didn't know. I swear on everything that matters, I didn't know my mother would do that. I believe you." The words came hard but true. "I read your letter too. The one you left on my porch. All 15 pages of it." He'd written everything. The guilt, the searching, the 2 years of whispering apologies to empty rooms. The way seeing her again had felt like breathing after drowning. The love he'd been too broken to recognize until it was gone. And his voice barely worked. "And I'm tired, Callan. I'm tired of being angry. Tired of protecting my heart so carefully that I'm protecting myself from happiness too." She watched Liana and Finn build something elaborate with sticks. "She asks about you. Every day. She doesn't understand why you stopped coming. Tell her the truth. That I messed up, but I'm trying to fix it. She's too. She doesn't understand messing up. She just knows someone she loved disappeared." Alara finally looked at him. "Don't do that again. Don't love her halfway. Don't show up when it's convenient and disappear when it's hard. Because if you're going to be her father, really be her father, you have to commit all the way. I'm all in. For her. For you. For whatever family we can build together. We can't just pick up where we left off. I know. We start over. Slowly. Let me earn your trust again." Alara was quiet for a long moment. "Supervised visits. Here or at public places. You can tell her you're her father, but carefully. Let her process it at her own pace." "Okay." "And Callan." She turned to face him fully. "I don't know if I can forgive everything yet. The firing. The silence. The ways you chose fear over faith. That's going to take time. I'll wait. However long it takes." Inside, Margaret was watching through the window, and she smiled. Sometimes love needed a push. Sometimes it needed children to show adults how easy connection could be when you stopped overthinking it. Dinner was awkward and beautiful. Liana and Finn chattering away, asking why grown-ups were so quiet, demanding more bread and making elaborate plans for future playdates. And slowly, carefully, Callan and Alara found their way back to conversation. He told her about moving to Riverside, about the house with the yard, about changing his whole life because being near them mattered more than any business deal. She told him about the cafe, about building a life from nothing, about learning that strength looks like showing up every day, even when you're terrified. When it was time to leave, Liana surprised everyone by hugging Callan. "Can you come to the duck pond tomorrow? Finn says you know all the ducks' names." Callan looked at Alara, asking permission. She nodded slowly. "I'd love to," he said, "if your mama says it's okay." "It's okay," Liana announced decisively. Then, with perfect toddler logic, "Are you my daddy?" The question stopped time. Alara's breath caught. Callan's eyes filled with tears. Margaret froze in the doorway. Even Finn went quiet. Callan knelt down to Liana's level. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm your daddy. I know I haven't been around, but I'd like to be now, if that's okay with you." Liana considered this seriously. "Do daddies read bedtime stories?" "The best daddies do." "Then you could be my daddy. Simple as that." In her world, love was measured in bedtime stories and duck pond visits, not complicated adult baggage. She hugged him again, quick and fierce, then ran to play with Finn, completely unaware she'd just healed something her parents thought was broken forever. Alara wiped tears she didn't remember crying. Callan stood slowly, and they looked at each other across the distance that was finally getting smaller. "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't make me regret this." "I won't. I swear." He left with Finn, and Alara left with Liana, and both children fell asleep in their respective beds dreaming of the day they realized they were family. What none of them knew was that this was just the beginning, that building a family from broken pieces would take more than one dinner and one hug, that Callan's mother wasn't done trying to protect her family legacy, that small towns have long memories and forgiveness doesn't come easy. But for tonight, it was enough. Sometimes love doesn't heal all at once. Sometimes it heals in small moments, in children's questions and whispered truths and the courage to try again. 6 months later, the mansion on the cliffs held its first real party in 7 years. Not the stiff charity galas Callan used to host, but a birthday celebration for Liana, who was turning 3 and had very specific ideas about what made a party perfect. Ducks. Everywhere. Rubber ducks, stuffed ducks, duck balloons, duck-shaped cookies. The theme was aggressive and ridiculous and absolutely perfect. Alara stood in the garden watching Callan chase a pack of shrieking children through the maze while wearing duck antennae on his head, and something in her chest loosened. This wasn't the cold businessman who'd fired her. This wasn't even the broken man who'd shown up at her cottage 6 months ago, begging for a second chance. This was someone new, someone who'd torn down his walls brick by brick and built something better in their place. The mansion had changed too. Where silence once ruled, there was noise and mess and life. Liana's artwork covered the refrigerator in the newly renovated kitchen. Finn's soccer trophies lined the hallway. The library that used to feel like a museum now held pillow forts and scattered books, and the kind of chaos that meant children felt at home. They weren't living together. Not yet. Alara still had her cottage, her independence, her carefully guarded heart. But 3 nights a week, she and Liana stayed in the guest wing. And slowly, room by room, night by night, this place was becoming theirs too. "Mama, look!" Liana ran over, covered in frosting, holding Finn's hand. "We made you a special cookie. It's a duck but also a heart because we love you." The cookie was a disaster of icing and sprinkles, completely unrecognizable. It was the most beautiful thing Alara had ever seen. "Thank you, babies. I love it. And we love you," Finn added seriously. "Both of us. Together." These children, born of different mothers, raised in different worlds, had decided they were family without asking permission or needing legal documents. They just loved each other with the kind of fierce simplicity adults spend lifetimes trying to remember. Martha approached with a knowing smile, carrying punch for the kids. "You look happy, honey." "I am. I think." Alara watched Callan being buried under a pile of children demanding rides. Is it supposed to be this terrifying? Love always is, but the good kind of terrifying. the kind that makes you bigger instead of smaller. Martha squeezed her shoulder. He's a good man now. Not perfect, but trying. That's all any of us can do. By evening, when the guests had left and the children were crashed on the couch watching movies, Callan found Alara on the terrace overlooking the ocean. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and pink and possible. "Thank you," he said quietly, handing her wine. "For today, for every day, for giving me a chance to be part of this. You earned it. Moving here, showing up, being patient when I was still angry." She sipped the wine, gathered courage. "I'm ready." Ready for what? To stop punishing us both for what happened before. To try building something real instead of just co-parenting. She turned to face him. "I'm not saying I've forgotten everything. Some scars don't disappear. But I'm saying I'm ready to choose forward instead of backward." Callan set down his wine carefully, like if he moved too fast this moment would shatter. "Are you sure?" "No, but I haven't been sure about anything since the night I ran into that fire, and I did it anyway. Sometimes you just have to trust that the person you're running toward is worth the burning." He cupped her face gently, thumbs brushing away tears she didn't know she was crying. "I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you. Nobody deserves love. We just choose it anyway." She kissed him then, soft and deliberate. Not the desperate kiss from years ago, born of loneliness and wine. This was different. This was choice. This was two people who'd burned everything down and decided to build something better from the ashes. When they pulled apart, Callan was smiling through tears. "I love you. I've loved you since you walked into my life wearing that ridiculous interview outfit and told me children deserve someone who listens. I loved you when I was too broken to admit it. And I love you now when I finally know what love means." "It means showing up," Alara said softly. "Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Then I'll keep showing up. Every day. For the rest of our lives, if you'll let me." "Every day sounds good." They stood there as the sun disappeared into the ocean, and inside the mansion, their children fell asleep tangled together on the couch, sticky with frosting and full of joy. This family that nobody had planned, that had been forged in fire and rebuilt in forgiveness. 3 years later, on a morning that smelled like new beginnings, Alara walked down the garden aisle of the rebuilt mansion, wearing a simple white dress and flowers in her hair. Liana and Finn scattered petals, arguing quietly about who was throwing them more beautifully. Margaret cried. Martha beamed. And Callan stood at the altar looking at the woman who'd run in a fire to save his son and had somehow ended up saving him too. The vows were simple. Promise to listen. Promise to trust. Promise to choose each other even when fear whispers otherwise. Promise to build a home that feels like safety instead of fortress. When they kissed, their children cheered and the guests laughed, and somewhere in that moment, every broken piece finally found its place. That night, in the mansion that was now truly a home, Alara stood in the renovated West Wing looking at the space where fire had once raged. They turned it into a library, floor-to-ceiling books and comfortable chairs, and a fireplace that burned controlled and warm. Callan found her there, wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking? That some fires destroy everything. But some fires just clear away what was never meant to stand. They burn away fear and pride, and the walls we build to protect ourselves from living." She leaned into him. "That fire took my job, my home, my sense of safety, but gave me you, both of you, all of this. No regrets. A million regrets. But not about where we ended up." She turned in his arms. "We're exactly where we're supposed to be. Outside, the ocean whispered against the cliffs. Inside, their children slept in rooms decorated with their drawings. And in the space between past and future, two people who'd learned that love isn't about never burning, but about having the courage to walk through flames together, held each other, and called it home. Because some love stories don't start with once upon a time. They start with fire and ashes and the decision to build something beautiful from the ruins. They start with a girl who ran into flames without hesitation and a man who finally learned that being brave means running toward love instead of away from it. And they end not with perfect happiness, but with something better, chosen happiness. The kind you fight for, the kind you earn, The kind that knows exactly how much it cost and decides every day it was worth it. Elara Quinn had come from a forgotten corner of Maine with nothing but hope and a second-hand suitcase. She lost everything and found everything and learned that sometimes the best things in life aren't the ones you plan for. They're the ones that burn away your plans and give you something infinitely better. Callan Drake had been a man carved from stone, living in a museum of memories. He'd made every mistake possible and learned that wealth means nothing if you're poor in love. That success isn't measured in buildings or bank accounts, but in bedtime stories and birthday parties and children who know they're cherished. Together, they built a family that didn't make sense on paper. But love never does. It just keeps showing up, keeps choosing, keeps burning bright, even when the world tries to blow it out. And when Liana grew up and asked her mother about the fire that changed everything, Elara would tell her the truth. Sometimes life burns everything you thought you needed. And then, if you're very brave and very lucky, it gives you everything you never knew you wanted. The end is just another beginning. The ashes are just soil for new growth. And the girl who walked through fire learned that she wasn't running to save someone else. She was running toward her own destiny. So here's the question for you. When life sets your world on fire, will you run away or will you run toward what matters most? Will you let fear build walls or will you let love tear them down? Because we all face fires. Different kinds, different intensities, but fires all the same. The question isn't whether you'll burn. It's whether you'll let the burning refine you or define you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about a time you had to walk through fire to get to something better. Tell us about second chances and forgiveness and choosing love when it would be easier to choose safety. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that broken things can be beautiful, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because every week we bring you stories about real love, messy love, the kind of love that doesn't quit even when it should. These are stories for everyone who's ever been fired, rejected, doubted, or left behind. For everyone who's ever wondered if they'd get a second chance. For everyone who's learning that the best version of yourself is often built from the ashes of who you used to be. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this family. And remember, you are loved. You are worthy. And your fire story isn't over yet. Now go subscribe, turn on those notifications, and let's walk through more fires together. Because that's what family does. See you in the next story.